Yeah, this is mostly for Dr. Vilallonga, but absolutely everyone can answer it. So I'm very interested in aesthetics, and you mentioned briefly the aesthetics of the materialists or the transhumanists or whatever you'd like in certain films and shows. But do you have any shows or media that sort of represents your sort of balanced aesthetic more?
That's a very interesting question, because at the end of the day, it's propaganda. I have quite a pessimistic approach to that. I moderate my consumption of media in general, and I have to say that there is no balance. It's more and more just the most radical vision out there. I could think that maybe the Northman has an approach to that some old movies, really old movies, may have some approach to that, but they are not palatable for modern audiences. Northman, of course it is, but really old movies, they can't be, yeah, it's really, we are fighting a Leviathan. It's huge, and it's a machine that is fueled by, an inextinguishable money source. And I'm fortunate, I cannot give you a positive answer other than Northman. I don't know if you want to just add something.
Yeah, I like The Northman. I say that. It was a great film, and it was the only one I've seen that sort of really encapsulates the specific fatalistic worldview that you find in the sagas and of the Icelanders and in Beowulf. And yeah, I mean, I know that some of the people who act in the film watched Survive the Dive, and I wonder, I sometimes, perhaps vainly and misguidingly, hope that the director himself saw some of my content, but it doesn't matter if he didn't, because as this information gets out there and as people take more of an interest in paganism, I'm hoping that there will be more media like that. Yeah, Dan, do you have anything?
Yeah, I mean, one of my favourite films of all time is Excalibur.
Oh yeah.
Which I'm surprised Tom didn't mention.
That is, yeah. Sorry, I forgot that.
But yeah, I mean, it would take hours to go through all of the esoteric and religious undertones of that film. Yeah, there aren't many films for me. I mean, I look to music more. I do think it's interesting how so many Hollywood films over the last few decades have essentially glorified the kind of the idea of nationalism, really, and of tribalism. Even films like Braveheart, and I can't help thinking that that's been some method of kind of like a safety valve, like a way for people to live vicariously the way that they should be living in real life through, the screen. But yeah, that's all I'll say on that.
Oh, hello. Yeah. I was curious how, I heard, especially with the first talk, very a separatism from a Christian conception of materialism, spiritualism, it was separate from materialism. There's a very distinct emphasis on spiritualism. How would you reconcile St. Paul's epistles and how they talk about there's a commingling of the old man and the new man, this sort of the old spiritual self and the new spiritual self in the material being.
So I have a hard time understanding the question. Could you want to know how Paul?
Yeah, because I feel like with your talk in particular, you felt like there was a Christian conception of how the spiritual was separate from the material, or maybe misunderstood. I don't know, But like, how would you understand St. Paul's epistles and how there's a commingling of the old spiritual self and the new, and how it manifests in the material? Do you feel like there can be a new conception of the spiritual and that can manifest in the material? Or do you feel like with the Christian perception, it's just a complete misunderstanding and that has led to a misconception in the material?
Gotcha. Okay. It's a very complex question. I'll try to give you a simple answer. Paul comes from a Jewish background, highly Hellenistic. He's truly Hellenized. So he speaks for the Gentile. He speaks for the non-Jews. And his conversion, which is very allegorical, so it means very fake, it's just a way to justify having him there for what was the church in Jerusalem, which, by the way, was exterminated during the Bar Kokhba rebellion because they were Jews. So you probably are referring to the born-again concept that appeared in the epistles. When the man is born again, so there is a regeneration. I'm going to mix here a little bit of Catholic and Protestant theology. There's this regeneration, and this regeneration, it's a mark in the soul, but at the same time affects the body that is cleansed. But this cleansing, Protestants may see that's permanent because of God's grace, and Catholics may think, oh, you can be stained again, so you need confession, you need the sacramental life in order to keep it pure. But definitely there is a big cut between the old man and regenerate man and saved man and the new one that is regenerate, that is saved. And even though Catholics say it can be tainted, it's still a new man. And this plays at the spiritual level, and it has an effect on the material reality. Why? Because Christians still, even though they chastise the flesh, and if you read the epistles, it's a lot of punishment against the flesh, they recognize the primacy of the spiritual. And they think that changing the essence of the spiritual is going to change the essence of the material. And the material, because it's evil, matter is evil, is going to go sinful again. And you need to use the spiritual tools that, as a regenerate, saved man, you have to use in order to, control and put the flesh up to, under leash. Let's say this way. I hope this answers. It's a very complex question, and I don't want to, give here a Christian theology essay.
We need more other questions as well. It's time afterwards to have chats and stuff and drinks after the.
Yeah,
Okay,
let's move on. Here we go.
Hello, this question is actually primarily directed towards Mr. Rowsell, but anyone else on the panel who'd like to answer, I'd love to hear some other opinions. So regarding the wider European diaspora, oftentimes back home in the States, I talk to friends, coworkers, other people about natural religion, as I like to call it, because paganism is typically associated with the Wiccans. And I hear a lot of concerns about people saying, well, I don't want to give up my American culture. I don't want to give up my Canadian culture, And the Constitution and things that are traditional as it pertains to America is kind of a second religion in the States. So I was wondering your opinion on whether a return to native faith would also refer to a return of purely European culture, or if these things can be combined with sort of new world cultures.
That's an interesting question. I love Americans, and I've enjoyed my time I spent in America meeting American people. I completely disagree with the entire foundational ideology of America, so I can't pretend to want to share their desire to preserve it. That is a question for Americans. However, it should be noted that the foundational ideology of America within America has been in decline for a long time, and it's been replaced by a new one anyway. The people who make up America now, aren't part of that ideology. This sort of the Puritan spirit and the liberalism of the 18th century from Britain and France, that's not foundational to Americanism as it's become anyway. It is now a form. It's grown out of that, certainly. For immigrants who come to America now with whatever religion they have, many of them aren't Christian, and it's basically it's framed in terms of economic opportunities, and Americans are now being encouraged by the authorities in that country to consider their country an economic zone, and the shared pursuit of wealth and pleasure is what's shared. Within that context, reviving your ancestral religion, it's no more oppositional to the founding ideology of America than it is oppositional to the current ideology of America. And what's important is that you want to preserve a sense of self. Even if you stick to the foundational ideology of America, it's still in conflict with what America is now anyway. I would say that generally, though, to more general question, like nation states as they exist in the West often have some funny ideology, like particularly republics. They have some funny ideology that sort of underlines it. But I don't think a nation, in the true sense of the word, can be based on an ideology. It's only a temporary experiment if it is, and it will eventually give way to something more natural. So I think that if you want to exist in one of those nation states, and you don't have to fight against it, but you should have a religious identity and an ethnic identity that is authentic and isn't constantly you're not trying to constantly edit it to fit a sort of shaky 18th century superstition in the equality of man. So I hope that helped. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything, not particularly pagan.
Okay, we have another question here.
Hi, this is a question for all three of you, but Tom, you mentioned that pagans aren't anti-technology. So wondering what you'd think that a technological pagan future would look like, and if there's any current technological means which could lead to that point.
Yeah, what I'm saying is there is not a religious, a theological necessity for opposition to technological innovation. That doesn't mean that an individual pagan can dislike a technology. Or it's like, there's evidence for like early, mechanics and all kinds of technological innovations in the pagan classical world and beyond. The success of the Vikings was down to their innovations in the technology of seafaring to some extent, and Romans had all kinds of technologies of sanitation and technologies of war. All these technologies are what helped their cultures to advance. Japan is a country that has stuck to its Shinto religion, even though it's sort of mediated by the introduction of Buddhism. But Shintoism is essentially a form of traditional polytheism, and it is integrated into highly technologically advanced civilization, not always successfully, sometimes in interesting and surprising ways. But yeah, I suppose it might look something like Japan. And then I'm not saying, therefore, that the pagan religions automatically have a fail-safe in their theological worldview that protects them from the dangers of technology. They don't. I'm not claiming that. Which is why each technology needs to be specifically considered, benefits and risks, and not reflexively celebrated as an innovation in some kind of cult of progress, nor reflexively rejected like some Christian sects do. There has to be a sort of a more nuanced path, and hopefully it would lead to something better than Japan, because there are a lot of problems with the way Japan has integrated technology into its life, in my opinion. Do you have anything to add? Very sure, yeah.
Technology needs to serve us, not the opposite. It's an auxiliary to our life. And if we see at some point that technology dominates us and we have creating more and more addictive technology, it means that this is a false route. But I agree with Tom. It needs to be a theological discussion. It's nothing set on stone. It's organic. And it needs to, to have this dialogue to understand. But I think that this auxiliary tenet is pretty much the standard on assessing for technology.
Yeah, I'm admittedly a bit of a Luddite, and I'm probably one of the few people in this room that doesn't have a smartphone, and never has. I spoke with Stephen McNallen recently, of the founder of the Arcitru Folk Assembly, and funnily enough, he's actually he's got this big dream about mankind, setting off into space and finding new worlds and things. And so we had quite an interesting discussion, and we basically landed on the very answer which Borja just gave, which is that we need to always ensure, probably through the means expressed by Tom, by judging each new technology on its own merit, we need to ensure that every new technology that comes along is that we're in control of it rather than it being in control of us.
Okay, we have another one here.
Hello. What's it? I've got more of an extension to your point about goals. I mean, you're saying about goals, and in a way that we're living someone else's goal through the way society, whatever you want to call it, is. We're living the transhumanist goal. That's their goal. We're living that goal. And like you say, we need to create our own goal, our own target, as it were. And a little thing for once you say, our technology is to serve us. In a way, it is, but it's not serving us. It's serving someone else. You know what I mean? It is serving someone, but it's not us. It's someone else.
Yeah, I agree with you. We're not in control of the narrative at all. Not everything that's going on in the world is under the control of those who despise our way of life.
We're not the arbiters of our future in a way, that's the and what were you saying? And this a great speech, by the way, great speech. Enjoyed the whole thing. We need to be the arbiters. We need to put ourselves in the place of the arbiters of our lives, not someone else. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. One more here.
I wanted to ask how we can gatekeep our religions from the more insidious liberal elements which seek to infiltrate them, and also through which means we will be able to connect with truly pious and like-minded pagans in other regions of the world where we should seek to rebuild our temples.
Who's it directed to?
All of you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, all.
Well, one of the criticisms of paganism that people have is that it doesn't have a core religious text that it can point to say this is what's right and wrong, like the Islam and the Bible have. Yet those actually haven't helped the religions of the book. If you can see nowadays, they've been successfully distorted, particularly Christianity. Islam less so, but it's getting there. And in the ancient world, there were great disagreements about what was orthodox in paganism, and that these were, wise men would debate such things. And I suppose really going forward that is the only option for pagans. Like if someone within the pagan, or someone who ostensibly pagan or claims to be pagan, tries to introduce ideas that are against our core, beliefs and against the beliefs of our ancestors, then we have to demonstrate this and explain it, rationally and with evidence. And hopefully the force of our argument will persuade those inclined towards truth, and that truth will win out in the end with the help of the gods.
Just three things. Do ut des. Do and you will receive. That's the main tenet of Roman religion. Tradition. as arbitrary. And third, theological discussion framed according to the previous two I said. And I want to keep it simple. I could just go on, but you know, at the end of the day, you need to live it and you need to think it. If you don't, you simply you cannot be pagan. That's essential. It's not something that lives in your mind, like many versions of Christianity. It's something that needs to be lived in your practice and in embracing, in having this struggle with theological ideas.
Okay, we have another one here.
There was a great speech from Dr. Borja and Dr. Tom, and I'm really happy that you could all come out here tonight. My question is specifically for Tom, specifically about genetic engineering, and you mentioned that it would be permissible under proper regulation. And my question to that is, if it is permissible under certain regulations, how can you expect those regulating bodies to not abuse its ability to, well, to use genetic engineering for nefarious means, such as you described earlier, implanting DNA into other organisms, such as I believe it's the word for it is chimerism, I believe. How can we trust those authorities to not allow that to happen? So let me just say one more thing, because we've banned human cloning, and yet the Chinese state is doing human cloning.
Well, the answer is we can't. And even if, let's say, in the, we actually, pagans had, actual clout and influence politically in this country, that we could influence the way that science in this country approached genetic engineering. It still wouldn't make any difference to the Chinese, would it? So what would happen? Realistically, we don't have any power like that. And we're a long way from having any kind of influence in that level of influence in this country. And even if we had it, it wouldn't make a difference to China. So I'm only talking about understanding what is ethical. Like, obviously, this technology has the potential to be used to create horrible things that ought not to exist. And I'm certain that it will be. And but what is our duty in living at the time when this is happening? To say that we think it's wrong, and to say the reasons that we think it's wrong. At this stage, we can't do anything else, and to pretend we have more power than we do doesn't help anything. So that's all we can say. But I'm receptive to opinions of people who say that genetic engineering should be banned completely. Maybe that you have a good argument for that, and I would like to hear it. That Personally, I'm thinking, like, it was hard for me in my mind to conceive of an idea where I could justify that theologically, because the pagan religions have clear, there's a lot of talk about the merits of breeding in the Rikstrula and in the laws of Manu and things like that. And breeding is about lineage. So sometimes if you're just if you're preventing, as I gave the example of congenital disease, you're reducing suffering and improving the body. You're not improving the work of a divine work of the gods in the sense that you're altering it. You're just removing flaws that have emerged from poor breeding decisions over time. So that I couldn't, maybe someone else could. I couldn't come up with a theological argument against it. But of course, it's much easier to come up with theological arguments against, like, more extreme forms of genetic modification, like chimerism, as you put it, or even other kinds. Like, for example, I think that the kind the Chinese recently did, another thing illegal, not the Chinese state technically, but a rogue Chinese scientist, the state alleges, who was who put the genes from Northern Europeans that make them resistant to HIV into Chinese babies. And those genes became common in Northern Europe with certain selection pressures that happened exclusively in Northern Europe, which is why they exist in there. And I wonder whether it is right to take genes from one population and put them into another. That's also an interesting topic for debate. Do either of you have anything to add?
I'll add a little something. I think that's a really good question, a really good point there. If I understand you correctly, you have a concern that it's all very well us saying that we're opposed to this, but if we have no power, or if a nation on the other side of the world decides to go ahead with this stuff, what's our reaction to that? And I think if we're going to be living within a godless society, then we need to make it very clear as individuals that we are not part of that godless society, whether that be to create kind of parallel societies or to, as Tom said, vocalize to the greatest extent possible our opposition to that.
Yeah, we have a question here.
Thank you for those speeches. They were very interesting. I just had a question because you both mentioned Plato quite a bit and Platonism, and this is sort of unrelated to transhumanism, but I was wondering, because I've noticed lately there's a lot of pagans, not specifically Germanic or Norse, maybe I should call them Nietzschean pagans, who react very harshly to Plato and Platonism, it seems lately. I even had one say to me that compared to Satanism, which was really quite wacky. And I was wondering if you would have a response to this in any way to soften their view towards Plato or Platonism.
Thanks for that question, Brendan. I mean, within Plato there is that tension within his own writings, because his views aren't the only views in his culture or within the culture of pagan Greece, and so in the dialogue he, argues against what's the guy who embodies a kind of proto-Nietzschean idea in Plato? Yeah. Okay, well, I thought it was a different name, but anyway, yeah, it's hard for me to, no, I don't think I can. It's hard to, Nietzscheanism is its own current, and it isn't entirely divorced from, Nietzsche wasn't entirely a new phenomenon, like he did to some extent represent a thought world that existed in Plato's time, but which Plato opposed. So perhaps there are different aspects of European thought that have to coexist. Do you have anything?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with this debate, but Plato was a pagan, and he was a very devout pagan. It's very clear throughout his work. The laws are a monument to his paganism as common sense traditional religion. He had all the instruments to doubt it, because that was his job theoretically, but the real thing is what he was developing a theological body, because he was thinking religion, he was thinking religious ideas, he was developing them. And what is seen as philosophy, it's actually discussing theological ideas, because philosophy is theology. It's not that philosophy is an auxiliary to theology, as the Christians were saying. And yes, Platonism was reused by Christians because they loved it, because it was so compelling, it was so impossible to ignore that they had to reuse it. The Jews had to reuse Platonism, and they created Kabbalah, mixing with the Greek magical papyri. If you read the Sefer Yetzirah, it's like, oh wait, this is a copy from the Greek magical papyri, but adapted to Hebrew letters. That's exactly what it is. And then you got into the pre-Lurianic Kabbalah, the old one, and you see, oh wait, this is just the Sephardi Jews that are reading Plato from the Arabs. That's the thing. It's so compelling as a theological body that everybody wants it. But the only ones who can have it, and that's a bold claim, are pagans. Because Plato spoke for pagans, regardless of St. Augustine could say centuries later.
All right. Yes. Okay. I should say I'm not a pagan. I'm just a fellow traveler. I'm curious about this question about transhumanism and genetic engineering. Now, let's assume, and I'd like to know from each of you the answers to these two questions. If we knew that we could genetically engineer an embryo so that it would never suffer cancer, would you approve of doing that? And if we knew that we could genetically engineer an embryo so that its IQ would be 20 points higher, would you approve of doing that? Assuming that we know it's not like the COVID vaccine, there's not going to be any side effects, it's absolutely safe. So, eliminate cancer, raise the IQ by 20.
First, I'd like to say thank you, Woz, for coming, and also all the non-pagans here. I don't actually know how many. Can I ask anyone who isn't a pagan to raise your hand quickly so you just get an idea of how many? So there's quite a few. I think there's maybe, it's maybe 10% or 25%, who knows? But thank you all for coming, and I hope that whether you be Christian or atheist or whatever you happen to be, that the issues addressed in this conference have been relevant to you and that you will be encouraged to bring them up within your own respective communities and make, because they aren't exclusively pagan issues, but yes, and thank you for coming. But to answer your question was, yes and yes, with the caveats that with the cancer, right? There's a genetic propensity for cancer. If a child's inherited genes associated with increased risk of cancer from his parents, and those can be removed, I don't see a problem with that. As for increasing IQ, if the child's parents have, for example, a certain amount of genes associated, alleles associated with increased IQ. So IQ is intelligence is a polygenic trait. So it's not like there's one gene that makes it happen. So the more of them you have, the more likely you are to have a higher IQ. If there was a genetic intervention to make sure that the genes that the mother and father have were present in the child, that I do not object to. I object to the introduction of any genes that were not present in the parents. That's what my opinion, that's when it becomes hubristic. Because if you're guiding the existing process of nature, then it doesn't seem to me that you're going against natural law. But if you're introducing genes that were never supposed to be in that child in the first place, then you are. But this is my very personal take on it, and I hope I'm guided by right principles and of my religion, but others may have a different view, and I'd be interested to hear it. Do either of you want to say?
I'm going to be very honest with you. This is a question that comes often to my mind and reflection, and it worries me. Are you familiar with a film called Gattaca?
Yeah.
The principle, as a principle, could be acceptable. The consequences could be terrifying. I've experienced myself, the problems of having a baby and having to go to IV in vitro. And when you start and all of a sudden you don't need that because what has taken you 3 years has happened just naturally because it had to happen at that moment. When that happened to my wife and I, it was like, we needed that? Or we just needed to accept fate? I know it sounds terrible, but don't think for a moment I'm being just the harsh voice, the stringent voice. It's a struggle. It's an internal struggle of reflecting on how conflicted the issue is. Because I honestly would love what Tom has said. But I know that so many people out there are going to just abuse it. And I've seen in vitro being abused by people trying to, enhance, literally, that they are doing right now, and it's legal. And it's like, yeah, of course I want a blonde, blue eyes, I want a boy, things like that. And actually happened, not the boy, the girl. But should I go there and just, yes, mom and papa genes, and just, I'm too fate-oriented to kind of give you a straight yes. I accept that. And I'm fate-oriented. No, and I want you to know I've suffered a lot because of the inability to get my wife pregnant for 3 years, and then happens naturally. And it's like fate is laughing at my face and teaching me a lesson. I know it may seem frivolous if I say that, but it's more of a very personal, deep struggle.
My answer would be no, because because I believe it would corrupt the weave of weird, which doesn't just. We kind of think of our own life as a journey and isolated, but I prefer to look at us as the most recent in a long chain of ancestors, and we are part of their story, and whatever we have inherited from them, for better or worse, is part of that pattern which we are meant to express in this life. So, for example, if I think of my own father, I love him dearly, and I wouldn't change him for the world, but he is a flawed man, and I see in myself some of his flaws. But I believe that my purpose here is to overcome those flaws. That's one of the reasons that I am here at this time. So I think if someone were to edit my father's genes upon, prior to my birth, to remove these character flaws that my father has, I think that would be actually removing an opportunity for me. Maybe it's easy for me to say that, not having a terminal disease or not having a child with a terminal disease, but given my current circumstance and my current worldview, I would say no, I wouldn't agree with that.
Okay, I think that's a good place to leave it. Ladies and gentlemen, that is our time tonight. Please give it up for your speakers and your performer. Please also do stick around. We have the venue all evening, so feel free to get drinks and mill around and network.
Do take a look at some of my other videos on ancient Indo-European religions, genetics and folk customs if you want to learn more. And don't forget to hit subscribe and the notifications bell. You can also access exclusive private videos which I make just for patrons if you sign up for either Patreon or Subscribestar for as little as the price of a pint per month. The links for these are in the description. If you support me, you will be ensuring this channel continues to survive and celebrate ancient European history for years to come. So thank you so much.